Also. All right, well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Tech Roundtable, sponsored by Jobs of the Future. I'm Anastasia Tracy Raissis, your moderator for today's exciting discussion. Just a moment. I think we have one more panelist coming in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Tech Roundtable, sponsored by Jobs of the Future. I'm Anastasia Tracy Raissis, your moderator for today's session. We're thrilled to have an incredible lineup of experts today to explore some trends, opportunities, and challenges surrounding emerging technologies like AI, machine learning, blockchain, robotics, and a lot more. As these technologies continue to reshape industries from finance to healthcare and beyond, the impact on innovation, employment, and society as a whole is profound. Today's session is a unique opportunity to hear insights from our panelists as they share their experiences and perspectives on how to best harness these technologies responsibly and effectively, preparing us for the future. We invite you, our audience, to learn and collaborate alongside us as we dive into this dynamic conversation. I'm sure it's going to be really fun today. So let's get started with some introductions from our panelists. So let's start with Peter. Please share a little bit about what you're currently working on and your area of focus.
Hi, everyone. So, my name is Peter Griffiths. I'm an urban futurist at Babel Smart Cities. Essentially, it's not just cities, anything in the built environment and infrastructure related. I suppose if I think about three core themes that I tend to come back to over and over again, the one is just innovation and productivity. How do we make places work better for all kinds of people? Other is data. How do we make the most of all this new information that we have? And then the third is training. How do we make sure we're ready for all that? So very happy to share more with all of the panelists throughout this talk. Thanks for having me, Tracy.
No, thank you for joining us. Shailee.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm Shailee Adinolfi. I'm the head of business development at Trust Machines. We are making Bitcoin productive through building consumer applications. We have three products right now. We have a self-custodial wallet called Leather Wallet. It is an app where you can use your public-private key pair to view your crypto portfolio and trade and bridge and do all kinds of things on different types of Bitcoin protocols. So layer 2 protocols built on top of Bitcoin. We have a Bitcoin liquidity protocol, which we are going to be launching soon, and where you can borrow against your Bitcoin. So there's lending and borrowing happening there, a marketplace. And then we have a top level domain called .locker, which is a Web2 domain connected to a Web3 digital identity on Bitcoin naming system, which is on Stacks, a layer 2 solution. So I'll just say that we are making Bitcoin productive through making it scalable and programmable and building consumer-friendly applications.
Thank you. Shelli.
Well, thank you so much, Tracy, for inviting me today. And it's such an honor to be joining this esteemed panel. I'm Shelli Brunswick. I'm a motivational speaker, author, and futurist, and I have a background in the aerospace and space industry for 35 years. So it's exciting to be here to talk about space innovation. And my first book will be coming out shortly. The series is called What's Space Got to Do with It? And the first book is focused on 10 life lessons for personal growth.
That's a great title. Thank you for joining us. All right, so let's get to the first question. And I usually start off with the big picture, and we start talking about emerging trends and use cases in your industry. So where do you see the most promising opportunities and how to leverage them to drive growth and innovation? What are you seeing big picture-wise? And let's start with Peter.
Sure. So I think the thing which is the most exciting to me isn't actually the technology side. It's more a growing imagination of what's possible. That to me is the real opportunity that technology is giving us, is being able to rethink how we use cities, how we live in them, how we work in them, what kinds of ways we relate to the people around us. That for me is, in a sense, the big picture opportunity when we start thinking about all the tech disruption that's happening under the surface.
Right. Can you give an example?
Well, I think if you consider something like, let's say, AI and machine learning, and you've got a machine that can essentially give you answers to a bunch of basic questions that people wouldn't have considered talking to a machine maybe 50 years ago. Now, all of a sudden, there are many cities in Europe which use essentially some basic bots to answer most of the questions, sometimes up to 90% of the questions coming into their call centers. That frees up a lot of time. It allows us to think differently about how we provision resources within a city context, and it actually allows us to deal with some of the real issues. So from that point of view, I'd say it's the opportunities, the imagination, trying to think about, we've got all these new things now, how do we live differently with them?
So I'm going to move on to Shelli. So a lot of what you focus on is infrastructure. So how does this tie into what Peter was saying?
Well, I think that's excellent. The first thing I kind of want to start with is when people think of space, they're thinking of going to the moon and on to Mars, and they're probably saying, okay, that's a really small, finite window, and how does that really apply to the growing planet and all the things we're talking about with machine learning, AI, advanced technology. And what I want to highlight is how space is actually pivoting back and supporting Earth. So when we think about the space economy in 2023, it was $630 billion according to the World Economic Forum, and it's going to grow to 1.8 trillion by 2035. But the big thing is to think about is just what you said. Space is really an infrastructure for many things. We're looking at, we're using Zoom right now. So telecommunications was invented by the space industry back in the Apollo era. So for every $1 invested in the Apollo era, the return was $7 for the economy. In 2014, NASA said for every dollar invested in space, it was a $40 return. So as people are investing in space, we're looking at how that technology is now benefiting us on Earth. When, Jeff Bezos started Amazon, he didn't think about, I got to build a post office to deliver books because that infrastructure was there. In a lot of ways, that's what space is now with telecommunications, with internet, with all the cybersecurity, with fintech, with blockchain. You're running on an infrastructure of space innovation, as well as all the other applications that are spinning off from space technology, whether it's agriculture or healthcare. And we can talk about that more later. But again, space is a great enabler because it is running an infrastructure that can allow businesses to flourish.
So moving on to Shailee. So you're in that Bitcoin space. So again, how does this tie in big picture wise?
Yeah, big picture, I've been working in the space for about 7 years. I would say crypto writ large, so Ethereum, Bitcoin, the broader blockchain industry. And before that, I was doing USAID funded U.S. Agency for International Development financial inclusion projects. So I worked with regulators and private sector in emerging markets on payment systems. And financial inclusion is the reason I came to crypto, and I like to say crypto. I'm an OG. I'll say crypto. And the reason why I'm excited about this big picture is because I think we're already seeing signs of this technology being a building block for a new financial infrastructure that settles in real time all kinds of financial assets. And so, for example, with stable coins, they're being used to do remittances, payroll, for all kinds of decentralized finance transactions. And we're going to see, and that was, I think, over 2 trillion in stable coins were settled in just Q4 of 2023 alone, Q1 of 2024 alone. So we're seeing growth on all sides of the crypto infrastructure space, and that will be an enabling technology for businesses to build on top of.
So there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of excitement on what's happening, but there are some challenges too. So again, big picture, but challenges. What are some of the key challenges professionals face when adopting and integrating these emerging technologies into their workflows, into their businesses, into their lives in general? So challenges. Let's start with Shelli this time.
Well, thank you again. I think we look at a number of challenges, but it's not technical challenge. It's human challenges. One of the things I talk about in my upcoming book is about fearing the unknown. And I think that's a big paradigm shift. You can watch it on TV. There are those individuals who are afraid of what AI and emerging technology will do. Is it going to get rid of all the jobs? Am I going to be displaced? What's going to happen to me? And instead of thinking fearing the unknown, it's about embracing the unknown. And we can see this from the worker all the way to the board of directors. We're seeing the board of directors are not really embracing AI either and asking management, what is your strategy for AI? I want to ask questions about how you're going to incorporate it. What's it going to do to your business? How will it expand your business? Will there be new competitors? So as we think about emerging technology, it's from the worker being afraid or embracing it all the way to the boardroom and how they're embracing it and asking those questions of management.
Okay, so you're seeing fear and of the unknown and uncertainty as a real challenge. So Shailee, what are you seeing in the space that you're in?
Yeah, I think a few things. So one is we need regulatory clarity in the crypto space. And without that clarity, it's been challenging, specifically in the US, but in many other countries to operate as a business. And, I think people in the US are probably aware that the Securities and Exchange Commission has taken maybe up to 100 companies in the US to court with enforcement actions without real clear guidelines. And so it's been really challenging. However, in the areas where we feel that, we can continue to operate, we do, and we've grown. And so we're staying on that course. I think one of the challenges is also around like AI and how we preserve our privacy and protect our financial health, all kinds of other data, while still allowing for the technology to flourish, right? Like, how do we keep our data secure and maintain privacy when we want over our data, when these bots are coming for all of our information in real time from all places? So I think that's like a challenge that we all have to face and maybe re-architect the way that we as individuals and businesses interact with technology. We need to be aware that like we will get hacked very easily. There's phishing happening all the time on businesses, on individuals, from every device. And so we need to think about security in a different way. And that is an interesting challenge.
Yeah, sounds like there's good reason for that hesitation that Shelley was talking about at the board of director level, because the boards are personally liable at times, right? So, yeah. So, Peter, let's move on to you. What are you saying? What do you think are some of the challenges?
Yeah, and I think in some ways it's very difficult to disentangle challenges and opportunities. And so at a kind of a top level, you've got enormous potential for labor disruption, but you also have potential for ecosystem disruption. And so both employee and employer are going to be affected by this in some way or other. And so on the employee side, thinking about, if in a sense more robotic tasks can be done by a machine, actually it might be more appropriate for a machine to do those tasks. And so there'll be a shift to greater creativity. And I would say the flip side of creativity is also greater uncertainty. So what's already been raised, being comfortable with greater uncertainty. I'd say on the more on the ecosystem disruption side, and I think some of the work that Shailee's doing is really interesting in the broader kind of Web3 movement, where you're shifting who owns what and who has ownership over data and over monetary. So if you think about cash, it's completely anonymous. If you think about something like, the blockchain, actually there's traceability and some interesting things start happening. When you extrapolate that out to everything in the built environment, actually you give opportunities for individuals to own discrete pieces of city. And that's potentially really fascinating. I'll give you an interesting example of it. So I've done work in the past with developers who benefited enormously from artists, let's say painting a mural on a wall. But that artist stops benefiting at the point of transaction. That might change. So we might see ways where people can keep extracting value. And so I think what that also means, Tracy, and just an idea I want to put to the panel, is that we are very likely going to move away from the assumption of linear change towards much more complexity. So even the idea of growth being linear, that might be very difficult to, with some of the technology disruptions, that might not be the case anymore. That's going to upend some of the financial models that organizations are working with. And so actually, if we think about the challenges, we're looking at a world that is less certain, more complex, and potentially a lot more interesting. And so I'd say put the challenges and opportunities right next to each other, rather than seeing them as necessarily a bad thing.
Right. So that's an interesting point you brought up about Web3, and there's a whole shift in the dynamics of ownership. And I think what you were alluding to was tokenization of assets when it comes to art, as an example. So you're right. As soon as an artist sells their work of art, pretty much it's done. But if the asset is tokenized in some way, they continue to receive value in the future when there's some kind of resale. So that's a very good point. I think we've talked about tokenization of assets before. Shelli, I think you had brought it up during our prep session. What are your thoughts about this?
Absolutely. One of the topics I discussed while I was at the World Economic Forum was the tokenization of space and how do we look at that. Now, right now, as we look at emerging nations or universities or other entities, they're not able to have space assets. As a matter of fact, right now, 2.6 billion people do not have access to the internet. So think about that. The internet, they don't have webinars, they don't have educational programs, they don't have access to good weather predictions. So they could be subject to climate events, weather patterns that can impact their crops. So when we think about the digital divide, let alone even get into tokenization, there's a huge digital divide right now on planet Earth. And the only way to really close this digital divide is with space assets, because most of these 2.6 billion people are in the equatorial zones in island nations that you can't lay fiber optic cable to. Now, the challenge is they themselves cannot pay for satellite internet. So what's looking at is how can other countries or other nonprofits look at providing satellite services to these nations as well as others and creating a business model for these shared space assets. Because right now, usually when a satellite goes up, it's already purchased. Who's going to use that bandwidth? Who's going to get that service? But if we look at tokenization of space assets, that means there could be fractional ownership of a space asset for communication or weather prediction or Earth observation or other activities. And then that can be made readily available to nations or universities or others that would like to purchase that fractional ownership. And the best way to do that is, as I said, through tokenization or shared space assets. So it's a really exciting area. And I know some companies that are already starting to work this model because eventually you have to go from a nonprofit model to a profit model. Otherwise, it can be unsustainable. But the goal is, along with Shailee and others, is as you bring those citizens into the digital era, you're able to provide them with the skills necessary so they can become part of the global economy. They can raise their standard of living, and eventually they could then pay for these services. So that is the goal of this model: as you go from a nonprofit form of it with education and training to become a profitable model for the space industry, as well as benefiting those 2.6 billion people.
And from there, I'm thinking democratization, and that goes right into what Shailee is about. So Shailee, what are your thoughts on the democratization moving in as part of that model?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. With some of these concepts around democratization of finance, democratization of just owning different things, right? So land, housing, a future park that's going to be built in your community, having a vote. So I think it's not just about democratization of finance, but it's democratizing via the internet of value, which is the blockchain, the way we operate. It's a different mindset of models where you're disintermediating these major third parties that are kind of like taking a cut in the middle, right? And I'm not saying that there won't be third parties in the middle. I think we will have intermediaries, just to aggregate things, make services and products user-friendly. But I do think with this new model, we are pushing some of that to the edges, where maybe you won't have massive banks in the future. Maybe you'll have a lot of little banks, where your community is your capital. We're kind of going back to the future a little bit. But the community is broader because it can be anywhere in the world because we have the technology to connect with each other. So I think that's the piece that's interesting, is like democratizing how you communicate, ownership of your data, your content, everything that you experience, and being able to profit from you putting in effort in different ways.
So everything that we just talked about has an impact on employment. I mean, we've talked about the loss of intermediaries, the shift of the banking institutions from large ones to small ones. There's impact here on who works at these institutions. How do you foresee these emerging technologies impacting the creation and transformation across these sectors? Are there any particular roles that you think will be most affected? And let's start with Peter this time.
Sure. I wish I had a crystal ball for this question, but I'll do my best. I think that we're probably going to see a few shifts. So the one is that for many tasks, some people are going to get incredibly good at it. So what I mean is competition is going to grow. So AI will in a sense replace certain job categories, and as a result, the people at the top of those jobs are going to find ways to be incredibly competitive. And so there's going to be a step change there. It's probably worth bearing that in mind. And that will probably exist to some extent across almost all job categories. So, it's not necessarily just tech categories, which at the moment seem to be quite, it's a data intensive or, more suited to machines currently. What that means is that, again, like people are going to have to become more creative and more comfortable with creativity. The distinction between different job roles is very likely going to blur. And so if we think about cities for the last 200 years, all of the innovation has come from segmentation and role division. What we're likely to see going forward is more and more, you'll have somebody who's probably a photographer and an accountant, or you're going to see a lot more exchange across things which in the past you might have thought is quite separate. So I think that's, in a sense, quite interesting. There are lots of people who aren't able to access the job market in more creative ways who potentially will be able to. I think we're also going to see a growth in more asynchronous job types. And what I mean by that is, at the moment, most jobs happen, let's say, in an office space, even after COVID. They all happen in real time. We're going to see a lot more functions which actually can happen across different times in different ways, actually packaged into, in a sense, discrete units. So I think that there's something quite interesting there about more people being able to access the job market than before, say single moms, people with hidden disabilities or visible disabilities. So we're probably going to see an expansion of the job market rather than a shrinking of it, which is also an interesting opportunity in terms of, I think in many countries in the world, they're possibly 10 to 15% of the population who can't access employment because of, their circumstances. Probably going to see those people being able to access the job market. So we'll see an increase in productivity through that too. So I think there are a lot of things which actually maybe we don't expect AI to disrupt, which may actually make work a lot more enjoyable and a lot more accessible.
That's an interesting point you just made. And actually, you're probably one of the first people I've heard that have said that this may result in the expansion of employment. And it's very interesting. Now you're talking about employment inclusion, which that's right. There are people that may be excluded currently because they can't leave the home, as an example. So very good point. And you're the first one that I've actually heard actually make that point. So let's see who can follow up to that now. Shelli, let's follow up with you.
And I absolutely agree with Peter. I think what we learned during COVID was when we create accessibility, we bring people into the job market that may have not been there. So, like he said, stay-at-home moms now can work. Those with disabilities are able to do that. We're seeing that in the space industry where, handicaps that we could have seen on Earth are no longer disabilities in space because of the microgravity environment. So, as we look at um, lifelong learning, as we have artificial intelligence, as we see jobs changing, this will really be beneficial for many nations. I mean, for one, the United States has an aging workforce, as does Europe and Japan and other nations. So what this allows is for those that may not be employed, that could be employed virtually or through, work from home, we'll call it, even though there'll be some other opportunities, it's going to be able to allow them to come into the market. But it can also allow workers from other parts of the world who may not be able to travel for whatever reasons to relocate to another country to work from their country of origin. And you're seeing companies that are creating this type of workforce for women that are in certain countries that maybe can't travel or relocate. They have families and they're able to work for a certain amount of hours and provide a certain amount of benefits. And I met one of these women who created an entrepreneurial company that does just this. So as we're seeing a workforce that's changing and the grain of some countries' workforce, we're going to see this opportunity as well as another new economy is emerging, the silver economy of this aging workforce and how they're going to come into the marketplace as well, where maybe in the past we saw the aging workforce, we think of them going to nursing homes or sitting in the park, and instead they're going to be actively employed in sharing insight and wisdom and being active in different ways, which will have different health benefits as well by keeping them employed. So I won't digress into that, but I think we see a lot of expansion of the economy with technology that's going to benefit it.
It almost feels like some of these companies that we're seeing in the news that have very strict return to office policies are maybe trying to hold on to remnants of the past, and they're not moving forward. It almost feels like it, but I don't want to comment on that. Shailee, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would like to say I've been working in a job from the future for a while because I'll tell you, I left government contracting. I live in Washington, D.C. I did that for over 10 years. I went into an office and then I worked remotely for crypto companies for the past 7 years. And I'm a mother of 2 kids. And I could never do that at a traditional fintech. I would have to be in New York or San Francisco, or I'd have to work in policy in DC. And I always wanted to work in fintech. And so I grasped onto the opportunity of remote work. And and because of COVID, then a lot of companies just decided to be remote first. And that's kind of held true for a lot of crypto companies, although people do value real life interactions. And so we do have a lot of conferences globally where we connect with each other, or we travel to New York once in a while or San Francisco or whatever city. We even build little communities with each other, whoever's working in the industry. I built a community of 400 people, non-policy people in DC working in crypto, VCs, product managers, engineers, from all different companies. And we get together and have our own conferences. So I think, and we have new roles in the industry. There's a role called community lead. That is a very important role in a lot of companies because your community is what brings value to a crypto protocol or an asset that's on that protocol. Because the interface is on top. You own your data, so you can take it with you across your applications. If I sign into my MetaMask wallet, I can sign into my Coinbase wallet and see the same things if they're supporting the same protocols. You can't do that with today's banks. You can't do that with Twitter or X. You can't do that. They own your data. You don't own your data, right? So I think like community becomes really valuable because it is a part of the value when a user can leave whenever they want. What makes them stay? It's that community.
Excellent points. Excellent points. All right, so let's move on to how to prepare for all of this, right? So you have shifts in roles, shifts in responsibilities, new roles being created, old ones being phased out. You have a completely different workforce potentially that's coming in. So how do you prepare for all of this? What can people do, or organizations, or both, do to best prepare for this shift? Let's start with Shelli.
Wonderful. Well, wonderful topics. And I think this is really great for those who are listening in on what does the future look like and how can you be prepared. And I call it my interstellar guide to success. And it's really about, some people call it soft skills. I call them essential skills. So we, I was a traditional learner. You went to high school, you went to college, you got a degree, you're done. Well, that has changed. We're now lifelong learners. Technology is going to change. We're going to continue to need to reskill and upskill, whether that's formal education or informal education, to stay current, not only with our sector, but with technology. And then we also need to build these networks. Like Shailee said, we need to network with people that are in the industry. Not only maybe, I'm in the space industry, I go to space conferences, but I also go to the World Economic Forum. I go to LEAP, which is the digital Davos. We need to go to these activities and events and network with a diversity of people and build those relationships to help us stay current, to build our community, and that helps us grow. And then we also need to have mentors. We say that over and over, but finding a mentor or a champion. Now, there's a difference. A mentor is somebody who can help you with the day-to-day. Here, I'll write a letter of recommendation for you. Okay, you get the next job. But a champion is somebody who really is insightful, like Peter, who kind of says, here's where I'm thinking things are going, and let me give you some advice on how you could maybe prepare for that. Or this might be the next step that I see coming that would be good for your career. So I think it's really important to find both mentors and champions that help you stay ahead. And again, focusing on those essential skills of communication and leadership and empathy and working with teams. And like Shailee said, it's working with teams, but you might be distributed teams. So that's very different than coming into an office environment. So it's an exciting time, but it can also be, as Peter said, we'll compare them. It can also be a challenging and maybe scary time for workers to think about as they have to pivot for the future.
So do you think organizations have a responsibility too? So maybe not just the individual lifelong learning, but does the organization that they're working for also have a responsibility towards their employees?
Absolutely. I'm going to say, in addition to that interstellar guide to success on what you can do, there's also the requirements of awareness and access that go with it. And companies and governments need to be making awareness about where the industry is going, what the opportunities might be, and then creating access points. How do we allow those underrepresented groups, like for instance, to come into the space industry or come into technology or come into blockchain or come into being entrepreneurs? Because sometimes there can be barriers or perceived barriers. Like right now in the space industry, I talk to people all the time and they say, oh, space is for astronauts or rocket scientists. I'm none of those. And it's like, yes, but there's more than 50 different careers in the space industry, from high school graduate to PhD, and we have opportunities, and the majority of those opportunities are right here on Earth. So there's these perceived barriers as well. And it's our responsibility as those in the industry to be breaking down those barriers, extending our hand, and helping people come in to the industry.
I'm glad you said there's plenty of opportunities for us here on Earth, because I'm afraid of heights and I have a problem climbing a ladder. So yeah. So Peter, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think we should take a step back and realize that change, or all the scary stuff, is also a value proposition. So there's an opportunity there for people, and I'd say that there are probably a few things that organizations can do, or just individuals can do, to prepare themselves for change. The one is just being curious. So ask people questions, especially people you don't agree with. Try and figure out why they disagree with you, and carve out space for just good mental health. If there's change, like it's really hard to just keep a clear head. So, just in a sense, starting there. But I'd say pragmatically, something that I see over and over again people struggle with is moving from discrete projects to thinking about more systemic change. And so I would say it's worth trying to understand that skill. Like, how do you move from just focusing on, I'm going to deploy this one single service, to actually, if I deploy the service in a certain way, it's going to change the way everybody lives in this town. So, being able to make that jump, I think is really gonna matter. I'd say that another thing that's also worth thinking, and I think, Shailee, your conversation just around blockchain, thinking about ownership, is learn to identify the difference between a rent-seeking economy and an innovation economy. Most of our current economy in the developed world is a rent-seeking economy. And actually that there's a limitation to that. Like, once you hit inflation, you're done. There's very little else you can get out of it. So making that step change towards understanding a slightly different dynamic. And then I guess the last thing is really just literacy. And by literacy, I mean the ability to interpret both the physical and the digital world. And I know, Shelley, you're talking a lot about space, but in a sense that space can be almost anything. And the comfort of realizing that the digital world and the physical world need to interact in some kind of a meaningful way. They're not that different. So at the point where we understand them as not being that different, how do you change them maybe at the same time, and being comfortable with making changes in the digital world that impact the physical and vice versa? So I say those are probably things that, anybody who's going on the journey of what comes next, if you pick up one or two of those, it'd probably be a good start.
Excellent point. So Shailee, let's move on to you. So a lot of people self-taught, a lot of people learning on their own. So in your area, what's the best way to prepare?
Honestly, diving in and getting started. I think, like, first, we need to remember we're humans. We have families. We can only do so much. So give yourself a little bit of grace. Be calm. Things will be okay. But it's good to be open and curious and a lifelong learner. If you're a lifelong learner, you will have no problem adapting. And I would say be incremental, set short-term goals with something long-term in mind, but just be open to that long-term thing changing, because change is happening so quickly that what you know now, I mean, within crypto, like, it's been 7 years. Bitcoin's a 1 trillion. I mean, that it's been 16 years in Bitcoin, but I came into this space building the Ethereum ecosystem, and it's grown tremendously, so rapidly, and it's been tough for me to even understand, like, some of the marketing tools and analytics tools that we use. My mentors are actually, a lot of them are younger than me, or my peers. So be open to people of all ages, gender, like diversity of thinking, because I mean, I learn a lot from even my daughter these days. So yeah, I think we have to be open to not just like teaching people younger than us, which I think is important, to have like a historical context, but also just being open to everything new that's coming our way.
I agree. I do mentor people myself, and I learn from them as well. I learn new perspectives. It's interesting that dynamic where you're both learning from each other. So highly agree with that. All right, so let's look ahead. I call this my crystal ball question. So what do you see as the next steps? What's going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years? And are there any specific collaborations that are needed in order to get there? So let's start with Peter.
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question. And in some ways, I'm going to start with the word scale. And the reason I'm going to start with that is because in many ways, Web 2 is all about concentration and scale. And there are still some startups out there that are very much keen on scale, but actually Web3 and the conversation we had about democratization and more shared ownership of resources and data, in a sense, we're moving away from a concentrated world towards one which is maybe a bit more disaggregated. And so I'd say one of the things to consider there is that's going to have an impact on physical spaces. So the idea of putting lots and lots of knowledge workers in the center of cities, that might not quite look the same going forward. So we're going to have to put some other things there. We're going to have to put some other technologies or reasons for being in the center of cities. So I suspect actually even cities are going to become more interesting, because all of a sudden the center is not going to be just about work, which, if we're entirely honest, is a bit boring. To have a city entirely for work, actually there's so much other stuff we want to do with our time. So I'd say fundamentally there's going to be a reshift to the prioritization of work at the center of all our infrastructure. And I think that's a really interesting shift. And maybe that's the idea that I'll put out there, is not that work's not important, but actually so much of what we've designed and the decisions we make and the infrastructure we put in place has been designed with work at the heart. And actually there's an opportunity to rethink a much more holistic understanding of how we invest in infrastructure.
Very interesting.
Space.
Yeah, very interesting. So I can see a complete shift in what a suburb is about as well as a result of that. Interesting. Shelley, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm going to stick with the space theme here because, as we know, over the next 5 to 10, I'm going to go 50 years, we are going to become an interplanetary species. So whether it's Elon Musk who gets us to Mars or in another way, but there'll be a lot of differentiation before we have humans on another planet. And what I mean by that is we talk about the future of AI and robotics and artificial intelligence. That's what's going to be leading this next tranche of space innovation as we create new space stations, as we return to the moon and have Gateway, which is like an international space station that will be orbiting the moon. And then as we go on to Mars, what that looks like. But the bigger thing will be how that innovation comes back to Earth and benefits us here on planet Earth. So as we look at climate resilience, how will space innovation from Earth observation or things that are being done for space, such as vertical farming or farming without soil and other things, how will that benefit us on Earth? And I think that embracement of, instead of space being this thing over here on the side that's maybe for billionaires or astronauts and rocket scientists, becomes more mainstream as opportunities for economic development. And as we said, for inclusion, like I highlighted, for those 2.6 billion people that don't have internet access, space is going to become that enabler that creates more inclusivity.
Very good points. Shaylee.
Yeah. I think how we move forward is, being open to a lot of different possibilities. But I think it's fundamentally this concept of scaling, but in a way that is both profitable and creates impact on real world problems. And I'm saying that because I've been working in crypto, and although we've reached, my last company, MetaMask, had 100 million installs. We had 30 million monthly active users. It was fantastic. And that scale was reached within less than 5 years, I think. So that's fantastic. But what we really need is to solve health problems, energy problems, agricultural problems in a way that's profitable and fun and not government grants driven. We need consumers to be excited and interested in that. And could we just have solutions that are not just about memes, but about, and maybe there could be memes about doing something good in social impact. But I just feel like these days, tech has kind of moved away from that a little bit. There's a lot of marketing around it, but the real impact remains to be seen. And I'm saying that because I've been doing this now for 7 years, and I really had hoped we'd be better off by now, but we are still working on it. We've made an impact. We need to make more.
It's a journey. right? So we're at the beginning of this journey and we have a long way to go. And I love the idea of, having fun while we're doing all of this. There is room for fun. And, based on today's panelists, all three of you, you're all really excited about what you're working on. And I wish more people were so excited and enthusiastic about what we're doing. So that was my last question. So I want to thank each and every one of you for joining us today. And this was a really great discussion. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience will feel the same way. So thank you again. And I also want to thank our sponsors, Jobs of the Future, and to everyone who joined us today. And let's continue having these great discussions and learning from each other and working with each other. So thank you again. And that's the end of our panel.
Fabulous.
for having me.
Thank you, and I'll see you around the galaxy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.